Hello everyone, this is Maurizio Raffone, and welcome to the Tech Shift F9 podcast, the show dedicated to helping you reinvent your career in the age of technology. I'm absolutely delighted to have today's guest, all the way from London, UK. His name is Peter Jasko. He's a successful technologist, turned entrepreneur, turned banker, turned again entrepreneur, whom I have the honor of calling a dear friend, and whose career journey is nothing short of inspiring. Currently, Peter is the founder and CEO of Semeris, a LegalTech startup helping capital markets investors and stakeholders review complex documents in seconds. Peter, welcome to Tech Shift F9. I'm very excited about having you on this very up-and-coming podcast, and I want to dive right in.
It's a pleasure to talk with you, Maurizio, as always. Thank you.
Peter, you worked at some of the largest investment banks. You worked in startups. You successfully exited your own startup, and you're now with your fourth one, Semeris, a legal tech company making use of some of the most cutting-edge technology, such as artificial intelligence and natural language processing. Is there a common thread connecting all these different experiences of yours?
Yeah, there's always, a cutting-edge technology that we're trying to work with, or something that's at the forefront, an exciting area to work in. For me, I always need a good challenge. And something new and exciting to look at when I'm looking at these different things. So in the banking world, it was a new type of technology, a new type of product that we're working on. In the tech, it's always looking at something that's cutting edge and pushing forward.
You just talked about new technologies and ways of doing business in general. And getting really good at these requires time, effort, mental fortitude. What are some of your personal characteristics and habits that helped you stay up to date with tech developments in general? What is something that you perhaps struggled with?
So it's always difficult to learn the new technologies. You need to figure out what the most effective way of learning these is for yourself. I am a book reader, self-learning. One crucial skill I picked up at university was that I learned how to learn. Picking your best way of learning and focusing on that is crucial. In my first startup, I learned Java and self-taught myself that. I'd heard about it in one of my jobs. I'd seen others do it, and it was a good choice. Sometimes you pick other technologies that you spend time, you learn, and then you realize maybe it wasn't the right choice, but you're still learning from that act of learning that technology. And, at some point in your life, it will probably be useful in some way or another.
Has there been a lot of peer support in that learning process, whether you with your colleagues or with people you come across that were doing the same sort of career path?
So when it comes to technologies, the key thing I see is that you're learning from what you learn from your colleagues is which are the technologies that make sense to learn. From actually learning the technologies, I like to do it myself. I'm a self-learner. But others, I think, work well by asking lots of questions and learning from colleagues. But picking which technologies, which route to go in is definitely a collaborative thing and works well when talking to colleagues, to peers, and reaching out to other people to understand where you should be going in the market.
Let's switch gears a little bit. The listeners, unfortunately, can't see you, but you're in great shape. You cycle, you run marathons, but you're a middle-aged man, which is a great thing, given I'm a little biased in that. What advice would you give someone, perhaps a little younger, worried about the pace of technological change in their industry, worried about losing their job, and not really knowing what to do about it?
It's always a concern, but change is always the only constant. And you just need to embrace it. And it's important to try to separate out what change is important and what is just hype or current fashion. And ultimately, don't worry too much because everybody's in the similar boat. You need to look and think about, what are the best options for you in your current time.
Let's dig into that a little more. One thing we learned in banking is that timing is almost everything, right? But I feel it's the same for making important career decisions. Is there a magic formula to knowing when to make a change or what to focus on when one feels that perhaps a little bit stuck in a role or function they're not happy with?
Timing is important, but it's also crucial to realize that you can't time everything perfectly. So when I started my first startup, I had nothing to lose because I had no assets, no family, but equally no concept of how difficult to start. How difficult a startup is to succeed at.
Right.
And the second startup I did, I had a family, I had a house. It was a big risk to do that. But actually, given the hectic pace of banking, which was the previous job I'd been in, it was less risk and fewer hours. My advice is always to look at where you want your career to go in the next 5 to 10 years, and not to worry too much about where you are today and, to take risk, but to manage the risk that you're going to take.
You're an entrepreneur now, and you've been several times in your career. And a crucial aspect of being a successful one is managing people effectively. How different has it been for you to manage people in the tech industry versus managing them in the context of a big bank?
In a big bank, where I worked was in the front office. There were very select top talent there. They were ambitious. They were always pushing. Ultimately, even the junior staff wanted to take my job. So I learned the skills to manage the divas. In tech startups, you do have some divas, you do have some top tier talent, but also you have a more representative mix of people. So for me, it was a big shift to manage folk on the other end of the spectrum who just wanted to do the same job day in, day out, and to grow at a slower rate.
Now, you mentioned about the fact that in the tech space, you probably have a wider pool of talent that comes with different skills, different ambitions, and so forth. And I know that with your current startup, you've actually tapped pools of talent in different countries. And I wonder, as you manage a multicultural, dislocated group of people, is there anything that you've learned from your banking days or from your previous startups that are helping you become or be a very effective manager?
So ultimately, you need to keep talking to people, and you need to keep, having those one-on-ones. I read a very helpful book from Andy Grove on managing talent, and he was a CEO at Intel, one of the co-founders there. We don't have physical offices in our current business, and so we spend a lot more time on the kind of the offline communications. It's almost like being a little bit more social media type like, or WhatsApp. We don't WhatsApp people, we use Slack, but we use similar style of communication to send messages, to send non-corporate messages even on the corporate channels, to say, look, this is what I did last weekend. How are you doing? Where are you going for your holiday? What are your next plans? And so being a lot more chatty than you might be on a much more corporate style corporate system. And that's essential because you have to build a rapport with your colleagues. It's not just about getting the work done, but also building long-term relationships.
Technology, particularly from the outside, I think seems a little bit of a difficult area to pivot into, to break into. Yet I strongly feel that tech will be more and more pervasive in every job, particularly white collar jobs. And you've seen the dot-com bubble burst. You've seen the global financial crisis from a position of really inside that whole situation. And you've gone through a few more cycles of tough times economically and geopolitically. But when looking at your peers, how did you see them handle such change? And were there any lessons that you managed to draw from others for your own career path?
I don't have a good answer to that one. So
at least you're being honest. Let me give you my perspective a little bit. And I realized this a little late in my career, but what I found to be particularly effective from others that were a little bit, I guess, in the same boat as me. And we worked together for a few years, besides the fact that we lived together for a while. One of the issues I had was really not trying to put myself forward into the bigger context. I was focused very much on my company and the progress of my work or career inside that company. But I was never really feeling that things happening outside of it were going to impact me. And they did, of course. And I wonder if the lesson I drew from some of the people that managed to make changes, they always seem to be a step or two ahead of things happening. Maybe it's just bias because I was looking at people that went through it successfully.
So I have an answer for this now.
Okay, go for it.
So ultimately, when people look at their CV, they often think about what it is I'm doing now. What is the industry I'm in? How can I get the best job based on where I am today? But, in mathematics, we have this concept of a local maximum, and you're optimizing for that rather than saying, you know what, if I switch careers and I take a little bit of a step back, or maybe even a big step back now, in the future, it will be a much higher maximum. I'll have a much better potential. And it might not be money, because a lot of people do optimize on money. It might be, lifestyle, interest that you're getting to. And particularly if you're switching careers, you need to look not just at, what you're good at, which industries you're good at, but what are the base skills that you have. One of the things I learned was that in the banking world, we do have salespeople, but I wasn't in a sales role. Occasionally spoke to clients, and most of my job was overcoming objections. Once the connection had been made to a customer, I was very good at helping them get over the line and helping close the sale. When it came to my own tech startups, I needed to learn the skills to make those initial connections. And ultimately, I decided that wasn't my best skill. And I started to hire people who were good at making those initial connections and where I could pick it up and close those sales. But look at your underlying skills, identify where the gaps are, and figure out whether there's an intermediate career path that you should take. A job before you get to the job that you really want to, or maybe even two steps before the job, to teach you the skills that you need to succeed.
Now, on the topic of skills, I mean, you mentioned before you're a self-learner, you like to read books, you like to deep dive into learning new things. We now have access to any sort of knowledge, essentially a click away or a course away that you can download online or get access to it very easily. Is there an opportunity, you think, now for people looking at making a career switch into a more entrepreneurial role to get better ready for it compared to when you did it a few years back?
It's certainly easier to get access to that knowledge, but so does everybody else have access to that as well. And sometimes it's just figuring out where the edge is, what is the right route into a particular market. Certainly acquiring those skills is easier because you can search on the internet and find answers to particular questions. But sometimes it requires a lot of sifting. And in other occasions, you don't always get the answer that you're looking for. You get too many different answers. So having a mentor, having somebody who can help you with those questions is also a great way of learning.
Peter, you exited one startup of yours a few years back. And I remember at that time, you were thinking, what was going to happen next. And ultimately, you ended up launching Semeris, which is great. I wonder, can you expand a little bit on your thinking process, essentially going from having done it, right? You've taken a company to a certain level, you exited, to starting again from, I wouldn't say scratch, but almost scratch.
Yeah, it's a curious one. At that stage in my life, I felt that I probably wanted to take things a little bit quieter and was looking to, find a good role within a more established tech company. But then COVID hit and changed the equation. And in the back of my mind, I had an itch, an idea that I had looked a little bit at 10 years previously, but hadn't really taken to fruition. And with COVID, with a little bit of boredom setting in because nothing was happening, I basically pressed the button and said, let's go ahead on this. We're 3 years in, built a successful business, but I won't say there weren't moments where I thought maybe I should have taken the job with a more established company and made life a little bit easier for myself.
Fair enough. I think it's always important to go back and look at choices made and evaluate whether the thinking process was sound, whether there are other things they should have been considered. It's all part of the learning process. But I'm curious now that you're at a stage where you've had the experience of taking a company to an exit. You've had the experience of running a large desk at a big investment bank. I mean, in terms of achievements, I mean, I'm not gamifying your life, but you've got quite a few box ticked. What's next for you?
It's always a tricky one to see where we're going next, not least because one of the issues that I see with the startup or a startup in general is that even if you decide that you've had enough of running it or building it up, it can't all, it's not always easy to untangle yourself or leave from it. So if you're working at a job and you decide that you want to leave, even if you manage that exit and you tell your bosses that, yes, I'm going to leave, you can probably make that move within 3 to 6 months. But within a startup, it's a lot harder to suddenly decide I'm going, particularly as you're probably have an ownership stake in it, and you want to make sure it continues to succeed after you leave, and you are probably a driving force in as a founder of that firm and making it work. So the timing can sometimes take 2 or 3 years rather than 3 to 6 months. I was talking to a friend of mine over the weekend who has been trying to, exit his startup for the last 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And hasn't yet figured out the perfect way of doing it.
Gosh, that must be a record. So, Peter, just one last question. I mean, this has been extremely interesting. So, Peter, in your career, particularly in your banking days, you were taking transactions globally. I mean, you were based in London, but you worked pretty much everywhere. And also now with Semeris, I know you have a presence in the US, you're doing business there. If perhaps you were a little bit younger, are there any areas of the startup world that fascinate you and that interest you in particular?
I'm based in the UK and I've enjoyed living here. But if I had been very, very focused on a tech career and had made that risky jump a little bit earlier, I would have definitely gone out to the West Coast, to California much earlier in my career, because that was where the startup scene was very, very strong when I was younger. Fortunately, there's now a vibrant startup scene here in London, but that didn't exist in the same form back then. So my advice is, if you see there's an area or there's a sector that's particularly strong in a particular, that's located in a particular region, and that's what you want to be involved in, then you should seriously consider making that move. Even though I didn't take my own advice and I didn't do that myself, that's what I recommend to other people. But culturally, different places are also, different in how you make your sales into customers and how you make your connections. The US is very, very open to having that initial conversation, but equally, they are very open to just dumping you, very quickly if they don't like one or two little things. European clients, it takes longer to develop the relationship, but also they are a bit more relationship based and they're willing to work at it even if something doesn't quite work out at the beginning. And different cultures have different ways of approaching problems. Even within Europe, we have that divide, and even in the US, you have that East and West Coast mentality in terms of how you look at problems. So
Very
always
true.
adapt your pitch to the particular region.
Absolutely. Peter, this has been great. I love talking to you. You know that. Hope you can come back on the show at some point. But for people that don't know about you and Semeris, what's the best way to find out more?
I'm a touch old school, but I'm definitely reachable on LinkedIn, and our website, semeris.com, is the best place to find out more about us.
Fabulous. Thanks again, Peter.
Thank you so much, Maurizio.
Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed listening to Peter as much as I did. I wish you all a great week ahead. Stay cool, stay positive.